Hey, Next Gen Millionaires, what is up? I'm Joe Burns, the Money Master, here with you this week on my live stream. For those who watch it later, thanks for watching. If you want to know when I go live or when a new video is posted, make sure you subscribe and like so you can get notified. Let's dive into this week's topic, which is kind of crazy because it was this morning I was actually going to run. Um, Started picking that back up this new year. I want to get back, like, move my body more than just playing hockey because y'all know I play hockey and sometimes that's the only exercise I get. So this morning I went running. Um, our little townhome place. We live in a townhome, and they have a clubhouse, and it has some treadmills. So I'm like, it's cold, like really cold outside, right? It's winter time, but at least I can go running, get some exercise in where I won't be too cold. Because running in the cold does not work for me. So I have to find other alternatives. So I'm sitting there, and when I run, I always want to, like, I find a podcast or something. Sometimes music depends on the field, right? I don't know how many of you are like that. It just depends on how you're feeling, what I listen to. So sometimes it's a podcast, sometimes it's music or playlist or something, a book. It just kind of depends on what I'm feeling. So this morning um I was feeling like a podcast. I'm like, what can I listen to that is going to give me some information, but not like make me follow along too much, right? And I find that with podcasts, I can enjoy the conversation instead of being taught something, like a book would be, or I just want to, like, disappear in music. Um, so podcast, right? So I chose a podcast. So, and I really like listening to the Freakonomics podcast. I think it's very insightful. The way my brain thinks, I like to, like, think of the way that he poses the questions and, like, the conversation. I really like it. It gives my brain a different thing to think about with the subjects they choose, right? And so I was, like, flipping through, and I saw one on toxic positivity. And if you want to go listen to it, I linked the particular episode I listened to this morning, um, in the notes or in the description. And it was actually from it wasn't the free it was on the Freakonomics radio podcast, but it was actually from a different one he does with Angela Duckworth. Um, and if you don't know who she is, she wrote the book called Grit, which was really good read. So if you haven't read it, go read it. It's definitely a good read about just kind of our drive as people to make things happen. It's very fascinating. But she's uh, I think a psychology professor from, like, University of Pennsylvania or something like that. But the book's really good. So if you haven't read it, it's just called Grit. Anyways, so I'm listening to these two talk, and they're talking about toxic positivity. Now, I've seen it a lot on the internet, especially recently, right? Where it's like people really getting on other people for being happy. And I think, like, they talk about some different things, and I'm not going to get into everything they talked about because I took a very scientific approach to it. Which, on a side note, go read if you read the comments off their episode. A lot of people are like, "You guys missed a point," and the comments weren't very kind to him, which was interesting. But I want to give you my takeaway from it. Okay, um, kind of, after listening to it and Joe's kind of thoughts on it and how that relates to money. Because that's the lens I always look through, right? How does it affect money, and how does it affect the way we think about money? Um, so if we take this culture of toxic positivity, right, and kind of what people morphed and turned into, because I see it online, I'm like, man, those, like, out there being, like, toxic positivity, like, advocates, or I don't know the right word, right? People who are going against it, right, are just like, oh, I'm gonna take you down. You're being too positive, blah blah blah. And I'm like, really? And I just had this conversation with Debbie this morning, being like, I worry sometimes for myself. Am I being too positive in an optimistic way that would kind of fall in the situation, right? And fall into what the internet claims is what it is. I mean, on this podcast, they're both scientists from a brain like that. So they break it down, like, kind of the difference, right? Um, but I look at that and I'm like, can we be too happy when it comes to how we show up in the world, how we interact with money, how we interact with our relationships? Um, and it was an interesting thought that my brain went through, like this kind of mix and mesh of thoughts and and ideas around this whole conversation. Because again, like I say, I'm a pretty positive guy. Like, I have some bad days, right? And you all don't really see that. I mean, it's funny. Years ago, Debbie and I were playing a game with some friends. Um, and the question I can't remember, it was like one of those question, and everybody writes an answer, and then we all kind of, you know, I can't even remember what the game was. It was fun though. But one of it was like, do you ever have bad days, right? And or something like that. As long as the question is having bad days, or are you happy? How many days of the year are you happy, or something like that? And I wrote down, I remember at the time, like 364 days, right? Or something like that, right? But it was like most of the time, like I generally am a pretty happy guy. I don't have a lot of, I would say, like really like curmudgeony, like unhappy, like grumpy days. And so looking at all this, I'm like, man, I'm challenging my own thoughts here. Because I'm like, can somebody be positive too much? Can somebody see optimism as a bad thing? And there are people out there who've had a hard life, and right, whether it's like loss of relationships, loss of jobs, money problems, right? There's all these different things that impact how we feel. Now, from my perspective, aside from the many years I lived, right, where I didn't have emotions, but understanding my emotions and then coming into it, looking at my life now, like I still have uh, probably 364 days a year. I'm a pretty happy guy. Like really, and that's genuine, right? But I look at it and I'm like, in every single of those days, am I happy for 24 hours? And the answer is no, right? I have my come aparts. I'm sad. I get a little depressed. I get grumpy, right? But what I've learned to do is I've learned to master my emotions in a way that I can have moments of my life that are not what I want them. But the real question is, how do I come back from that? Right? A perfect example was a couple weeks ago in one of my hockey games. I play defense, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, my goal is not to let them score. Okay. In the first period, they scored four goals, and I was on the ice for three of those goals. I was not having a good game, right? It was a bad game. Now, I could have chosen to like self implode and just be like, blah, this sucks. I'm a horrible player, blah, blah, blah. What I did was I reset. Right? That's what I think makes a difference. Is I reset myself in that moment, and guess what? They didn't score any more goals the rest of the game. Now that wasn't just my doing, but they didn't score while I was on the ice again. I learned. I'm like, which players do I need to watch when I'm out there? And I tell them the entire time. I didn't necessarily play my position. I played man on man. Right? I figured out what wasn't working and I fixed it. I had a great rest of the game. Like it was really fun. We came back and we tied it. Like how cool is that? But I look at that in our lives and I'm like, what are we doing that's allowing us to sit where we start getting after people because they're too happy? And now I'm not talking about happiness and when you ask people like a church and it'll be like, hey, how you doing? You're like, I'm fine. Like fine is a four-letter F word that is fake when it comes to our emotions. When I hear people say fine, I'm like, okay, what are you really feeling? Because fine is just a cover up. So people quit asking questions. That's what society has taught us, right? Okay is like a step up from that. But if I hear fine, right? In my house, my mom was always like, whenever she was grumpy, you'd ask her, how you doing, mom? Fine. Right. And it was just that kind of curmudgeon, like, whoa, right? So fine is that four-letter F word that's never really reflecting how we're feeling. So when people say fine, right? That and that's like that. I think that's what I would label as more that toxic positivity, like where we're faking it so we can fit in. It's okay not to be okay, right? There's plenty of stuff on the internet that's tagged from out there. But it's okay not to be okay. The question is, what are we going to do about it so that we can get back to a place of where we love being alive, where we love the situation we're in. When it comes to money, it's the same thing. How does money trigger us? Is it triggering a bunch of emotions we don't know what to do with, and we're spiraling out of control? Right? I've been talking about money meltdowns for a couple months now. It's the same thing, right? Are we allowing ourselves to get caught in a meltdown that just perpetuates for days and weeks? Or are we taking control back of our lives and be like, no, there's a different way I can be. So I'm going to implement my tools. I'm going to do some meditations. I'm going to like write and burn. I'm going to do all these things so I can get back to a place of where I want to be. Okay. I'm going to say this and people are going to get grumpy at me. But happiness is a state of being that you choose into. Now, don't come at me and say, Joe, what about depression and all this psychology, like the things that are like medically diagnosed? Yeah, those people, that's not who I'm talking to. Okay. These people have other issues of why they can't choose into happiness. They try to. Trust me, I know plenty of people who are in this like the mental health state of where they're getting help for it. And they want to be in a better place and they're working towards that. And that's amazing. Okay. I'm not talking to them though. Okay. I'm talking to you who are here who live a pretty conscious life, I'll say. Right. So my charge for you this week is really going to be, are you in the state of being you want to be in? Okay. If you are not, why not? Like for reals, why not? Is it relationship problems? Is it money problems? Is it stress caused by one of those? Figure it out because you are in control of how you are each week, each day, each moment. And are you going to allow yourself to stay in the funk or are you going to seek the help you need to get out of it? Sometimes that's phoning a friend. Be like, hey, I'm feeling pretty miserable today. I don't know why. Friends can give you great ideas. The thing is, you got to go do them. Sometimes, literally, I kid you not, with all the working from home we've experienced over the last 2 years, from all the being inside away from people, sometimes all you need to do is go outside and get a little bit of sunshine. Like for reals. When I'm feeling really like, "Wah," during the day, like a plant, right? I'm going to walk outside and I'm going to get a little bit of sunshine. And I live in Utah in the wintertime. Like Sunday, like daylight like that is not always readily available. But you got to figure out what it is you want to, the state of being you want to be in. Because I would label, back to the beginning, right? Label that toxic positivity of you living in a state that's not true to yourself. Okay. And guess who gets to choose the state you want to be in? You do. I hope you get this, right? Is this making sense? I hope it does. Because at the end of the day, we are in charge of our feelings. We're in charge of our little universe right here, which is us. We get to accept what people say to us as truth or not. We get to change the state of being of where we're at. We get to do that in our lives. Now, that doesn't mean it has to look like somebody else's, right? It can look exactly like you want it to. And I'm going to challenge you to like look at this next week and end up next week in a little bit better place than where you're at today, of where you want it to be, right? You're the only one who can set those rules. I can't set them for you. Nobody in your life can set them for you. When you do that, you're going to start to have more happiness, more joy in your life. And as I know about money, right? Money follows the joy. It likes when we're happy, when we're enjoying life. It really does. Okay. So again, I'm gonna always push you back to stop the money meltdown tool. Like if this meltdown is happening, right, around money, you're living in these states of meltdown, then it's time to change that. It's only 5 steps. I go through YouTube comments this morning and someone said, hey, I'm so happy you have this out here. Thank you. It's helping with my money meltdowns and other meltdowns in my life. You can use this tool for other things too. I promise. Switch it up. But what I know is if we do something different today, then we'll have a different tomorrow. If we do something different next hour than we did this hour, we'll have the hour after that even look different. You can change these things, I promise, in the moment. You have to be conscious of them. You have to know what your state of being is. And then when it shifts, you got to make the necessary changes to get back to where you want to be. Okay? So think about it. Think about like from my definition of all this, right? Are you living in toxic positivity, meaning you're being fake when you're saying you're okay and fine? Think about that. That doesn't mean you have to go like be like I'm a mess to everybody, but stop lying to yourself that you're fine or okay because you're not. And if you're not, then how do you get to being amazing and great and awesome? Fantastic. Whatever that word is for you. Because that should be the goal. Aside from everybody else in this world, that should be the goal you strive for each day. And if you can get there, then I know that solving the money issues you're running into, knowing what to do with your money, feeling that pressure gets easier. I promise. So, lots to think about this week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for just like choosing into a new state of being, and really just having fun with this. Okay. So, and if you have any questions or comments, drop them below. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Bye.